Okay, little one. Are you ready to spend some more time with Oma, sitting in a rocking chair and reading? It's time for us to pick up our book, Hitty, Her First 100 Years, again. And tonight we're going to read one chapter. Remember what happened in the last one? When Hitty got separated from Phoebe Preble? And now she's in a completely different country. So let's read about this new adventure of Hitty's. Are you ready? Snuggle in. If you want to, you can close your eyes and listen to the rocking chair, listen to the fire. All of that help you to relax and just focus on the story while Oma reads. Are you ready? Okay. Chapter 9, in which I have another child to play with me. If I devote less space to my days with Little Thankful, it is not that I was unhappy during the 2 years I was her doll, but simply that other periods of my life have been more eventful. I was presented to her on the morning of her 4th birthday, and I saw her well started into her 6th year. I cannot truthfully say that she lived up to her name, but I doubt if many children could do so. And though she had been born in a missionary station and reared to the sound of hymn tunes and sermons from babyhood, she possessed as high spirits as any child I ever belonged to. In fact, her temper was not always dependable. But doubtless, this was because she had no children of her own kind to play with, and the native nurse who tended her gave in to her whims at every turn. It was indeed high time she had a doll, and though she never lavished the same amount of care and affection upon me as Phoebe Preble had, still I must in all justice say that she never treated me unkindly, but I have not reached the place for that yet. Little Thankful's mother was better at hymns and Bible lessons than dressing dolls. However, I was so glad to feel decent cloth upon my back again that I was in no mood to insist upon the latest fashions. She made me a rather voluminous dress of cotton print in a far from gaudy pattern. It nearly covered my painted feet, and the ruffle about my neck practically hid my coral beads. But these were small matters. I was clean and comfortable, and I belonged to a little girl again. If life seemed quiet and somewhat dull at times in that remote station in the hills, with nothing more exciting than an occasional package of letters from the outside world, or a baptizing of newly converted natives, at least I knew that I was safe and in good hands. During this time I had leisure and a chance to improve my mind more than heretofore. All through the long, burning midday heat, as we sat in the dimness within doors, while native boys ran barefoot about their household tasks or pulled at the fan ropes to make a breath of air in the room, Little Thankful's mother taught her to read and write a little and add up to 50. She also taught her Bible texts, the Catechism, and many hymns. I must confess that this made me a little uneasy at first. There was a part about remembering our frame that we are dust, which rather alarmed me until I remembered that this did not apply to me, since I was not made of dust at all but of good solid ash wood. After that, I did not let any of the phrases, no matter how strange they sounded, bother me. The hymns were more to my taste, and I committed a number of them to memory as Little Thankful droned out after her mother. Some impressed me so greatly that I can even say parts of them to this day. I remember one favorite that began, "From Greenland's icy mountains, from India's coral strand, where Afric's sunny mountains roll down their golden sand." This seemed particularly appropriate to me. Also, the verse, "In vain with lavish kindness the gifts of God are strown. The heathen in his blindness bows down to wood and stone." But I felt that this hymn could teach me little after all my experiences on the island. I wondered what Little Thankful's parents would say if they knew that they were entertaining in their midst one who had been just such an idol. Little Thankful was working on a sampler, too, with roses and doves and a weeping willow. It had a verse as well, which I can still recall. While beauty and pleasure and passion hold sway, and folly and fashion would lure us away, oh, let not these phantoms our wishes engage. Let us live so in youth that we blush not in age. I thought this rather disheartening advice, but Little Thankful took it to heart not at all. Then one day when she was well past her 5th birthday and growing tall and active, Little Thankful fell ill of a serious fever. I do not know much about it except that she lay in a stupor for many days, and her father and mother used one after another of their best remedies, but all to no avail. Her nurse scarcely left the bedside, but finally, when the fever went from bad to worse, she slipped out and returned stealthily with a native doctor. For some time he studied the little girl in the big bed, felt her hands and forehead, made some curious passes over her with his long brown hands. Then he went away, leaving with the old woman some herbs and directions for brewing them. She evidently knew that Little Thankful's parents would not approve of native treatment, for she had managed this all in secret. And how she was able to cook the herbs as he had told her, I shall never know. At all events, she was determined upon saving her charge's life. I myself saw her slip in and administer the dose while the child's mother was out of the sick room for a moment. Whether it was the native remedies or the doses from the family medicine chest or Little Thankful's own spirit, I shall never know. Perhaps it was all three of these things working together, but at last she was strong enough to get up and move about, although she was far from her old lively self. So her father and mother put their heads together and decided that it was high time she returned to America. This is no climate for children, they told each other one night after she was asleep. I could hear them from where I sat on a light stand beside her bed. We might as well make up our minds to send her back to Philadelphia the first chance we get. Philadelphia, I had heard, was where Little Thankful's grandparents lived, her mother's people. They had never seen their granddaughter, and every letter from them begged to have her sent to live in the old house where her mother had been born and brought up before her. Yes, agreed her father and mother, it is not good for the child to grow up in such a place as this. Much as we shall miss her, she must go. Go we did. There had been much bustle and many preparations beforehand. Word had come unexpectedly of friends who would undertake the care of Little Thankful on the long voyage, and immediately our things were packed and we started on a long journey by bullock cart over rough mountain roads. At last, by devious ways and a flat river boat, we reached lower lands again. I had not known that the Hindu snake charmer had brought me such a long distance, though it had seemed far enough at the time. Once again, I found myself in the thronging streets of Bombay. Once again, I was to be a passenger aboard a sailing vessel and homeward bound. There was a very sad leave-taking when Little Thankful said goodbye to her parents. They would not, in all probability, see her for 5 more years, so it was no wonder they cried as they watched her go away with the ladies from another mission station. These two were middle-aged and unused to children, as the child discovered before we had been settled 24 hours on the boat, a fine clipper called the Rainbow. Their idea of looking out for her was to hear her repeat her prayers night and morning, see that she ate porridge for breakfast, and occasionally administer a large dose of calomel. All very well as far as it went, but Little Thankful had plenty of chance to get into mischief at the same time. After the first few weeks out, her own parents would scarcely have known the child. She made almost as free of the ship as Phoebe Preble had done, though she was less clever and adventurous at climbing the ratlines. Her sandy hair, usually kept brushed as smooth as satin, now blew about her shoulders in wild disorder. Her face had almost as many freckles to the square inch as Andy had been able to boast on the island, and the ruffles of her pantalettes and petticoats were in disgraceful tatters. If the good ladies attempted to do anything about this, Little Thankful would be away and out of their sight with the swiftness of a squirrel. So finally they gave up and let her go her own way. She made many friends also among the crew, but the captain of this ship was not one to take up with children or passengers. Of these I saw little or nothing, for I spent more time in the stuffy cabin, which Little Thankful shared with one of the missionary ladies, than I had done on either of my previous voyages. However, I could see blue water and hear the familiar sounds of shouted orders, of wind in the rigging, and the shanties that the men sang as they hauled on their lines. Every day, I knew, brought me nearer to the shores which I continued to regard as home, though I had spent far more time away than upon them. And so our voyage drew to a close. Cleaner, of course, because of the lack of whale oil, but also, by the same token, less eventful. We saw the shores of the Carolinas early one morning, and after that it was only a matter of a few days and one or two stops at other ports for discharging cargo before we came to our destination. My first recollection of Philadelphia is of driving through its pleasant brick-lined streets very early one morning as Little Thankful's grandfather took us to his house. It was a sunny April day. The hoofs of the fine pair of horses clattered briskly over the cobblestones, and by nearly every door a maid was out scouring the steps or polishing the brass door knockers. Trees and green bud showed in yards or little open squares, and there was much bustle of tradesmen opening the shutters of their neat, well-kept shops. I wanted to cry out for joy at such sights and at the gilt weather vane topping the pointed steeple of a church we passed. I was upon familiar ground again, and I felt happier than I had done since I became parted from the Prebbles. Little Thankful and I were soon the center of attention in a brick house with white trimmings and 3 short steps that led straight from the front door to the pavement. It was on Christian Street, so it seemed no wonder to me that the daughter of the family should have turned into a missionary and gone off to save the heathen. The house inside was much more elaborate than the Prebbles, though far less roomy and rambling. The fireplaces were smaller, the rooms narrow, with quite elaborate glass lamps from which dangled crystal points. All the furniture looked very handsome and solemn, and as if no child had used it for many years, as was indeed the case. Little Thankful's grandmother was a plump old lady with the whitest hair and the pinkest cheeks, and the most dimpled pair of hands I have ever seen. She dressed in rustling black silk and lace caps with long pleated streamers that stood out on either side when she bustled about. She bustled a great deal that first day, continually shaking her head or making little clicking noises with her teeth over the sorry state of her granddaughter's wardrobe. "Dear, dear," she sighed to her husband, "it's just as I said. India's no place to bring up children. But it's no worse than I expected. The poor child hasn't even a merino or a dimity to her name, and as for her bodices and her under muslins, really it pains me to think that a grandchild of mine should come to such a pass." "You must buy all the materials she needs tomorrow, my dear," the old man assured her. "The very best you can find, and get a seamstress in directly. I want her to be as well set up as any other little girl in Philadelphia. How that suits you, Miss Thankful, eh?" But her grandmother could only shake her head some more. "That's all very well," she said, "but it'll take weeks, and I promised the Prices she should go to the party tomorrow." Little Thankful was all excited at the idea of this event, for it was to be her first party, as it was to be mine. Her grandmother took us out shopping in the morning, where I was dazed by all the fine stores. In those days, ready-made dresses had not been invented. It would have seemed a real calamity not to have one's clothes fitted and stitched by a nimble-fingered dressmaker who stayed at a house for weeks in order to fit out different members of the family. "I shall see that you have a rosebud sash and new slippers, at any rate," Thankful's grandmother said with determination, and she was better than her word. The slippers were of fine Morocco leather, crossed over the ankles and tied with ribbons. The new sash quite transformed her old best India muslin, and when her hair was brushed smooth and glistening, and an old blue enamel locket of her mother's loaned for the occasion, her grandmother said she would do, though it was not what she could have wished. She didn't know how they would ever get rid of all those dreadful freckles. I thought no one was going to pay any heed to my appearance, and I grew quite worried. But at the last moment, Little Thankful found a piece that had been snipped off the sash. This she wrapped about me shawl fashion, and she pulled my beads out to show as much as possible. So off we set for the party. The Price's house was only a few doors distant. A maid was dispatched with us, and soon we were in another fine brick house and our wraps being laid on an enormous canopied bed with a great many other little cloaks and bonnets. Such a babble of voices came up from below stairs. It sounded to me like the noise of the baby crows in the old pine, and this put me in a less happy mood to go down to it. But down we went, Little Thankful holding me in one hand and clinging to the balustrade with the other. She still found it strange to go up or downstairs, since the house in India had been built, native fashion, all on one floor. A large lady in still more rustling silks met us and kissed the child warmly. "Ah," said she, peering down at her, "I must take a good look at you, to see which side of the house you favor." "I don't want to look like any house," said the Little Thankful, who was beginning to feel less shy about being ashore after being ashore a whole day. "And I mean to wear a nose ring when I grow up." The lady looked very much startled at this, and I heard her repeating it to another lady later on, and adding that she did not envy the old people the life she was going to lead them. We were now conducted to a very large room, which seemed completely filled with little girls in ballooning frocks and gay sashes. They looked like a flock of tropical butterflies, I thought, with their bright bows, their starched ruffles, lacy pantalettes, and shining curls. I was enchanted by the sight, and I had no idea that they were not as charming in manner as in appearance. In this I was mistaken. Indeed, I underwent such a shock at that party that I have not had quite the same faith in human nature since. For no sooner were the grown-up people out of the way than the little girls gathered about us and began to pass remarks upon Little Thankful's appearance and mine. They tittered and whispered things to each other behind their hands in a way that was anything but reassuring. Perhaps they meant no real harm, but certainly they did nothing to make us feel at ease in their midst. "If that is the way they dress in India, I shall certainly never go there," said one pert young miss in flowered dimity. "What makes you have so many freckles?" asked another, peering at her very rudely. "And why don't you wear curls and ruffles all the way up your skirts?" This to Little Thankful, who had been led to fancy herself perfect in every detail. I could not but feel sorry for her during this trying ordeal, for she was quite unequal to answering their jibes. She continued to stare back at the children as if they were strange animals into whose claws she had fallen. I could not blame her, and I felt almost relieved when after a time they caught sight of me and began to poke fun at my appearance instead. At least I am going to be some help to her, I thought. She will be grateful to me when we are home again. The things those children said about me. It would depress me too much even now to repeat them all, but they left me scarcely a shred of comfort. If I had not been a doll of experience and some poise, I doubt if I should ever have recovered from that half hour of criticism. According to those little girls, I was an ugly old thing, a perfect fright, and I looked as if I came out of the ark. But what hurt me most of all was when one young lady said that I looked as if the cat had fished me out of the dump heap. Of course, I had not been so foolish as to suppose my experiences in saltwater, fire, and the tropics had left me untouched, but somehow I had not realized that their ravages were so apparent. I knew my complexion had suffered somewhat, but then so had other people's. At any rate, this remark went deep, though I am happy to say that no one would have guessed it to look at me. No, I was one to remain true to my type and pleasant expression. The little girls now began to bring out their own dolls, and I must admit in all truth that I did not make much of a showing among them. In the first place, my size was against me, for these were all of more imposing stature, and many of them had beautifully glazed china heads. There were even some exquisite wax beauties with real hair and wide glass eyes. I was the only wooden one in the lot, and even the most simply dressed of them all looked like a princess beside my modest attire. I thought if only Little Thankful would show them my corals, this might help, but her one idea was to get me out of sight as speedily as possible. At last, the children were summoned to supper in the dining room beyond. All the dolls were hastily heaped upon a big sofa before the fire. I found myself with a china lady on one side and an enormous wax beauty of dazzling complexion on the other. It was a very trying position to be in. No sign passed between us there, but I felt their eyes regarding me with disapproval. Still, beauty is not everything in this world, I told myself. Just at that moment, I could not but feel it was a very great help indeed. Nevertheless, I determined to do my best, no matter what might happen, in order that little Thankful should have no cause to feel ashamed of me. Ah, how little did I guess the scheme that was even then stirring in her mind as she sat at the long table with the others. And now comes the unbelievable part of this whole episode. It pains me to tell it, but told it must be. When the lighted birthday cake was brought in, and all the children got up from their places to crowd about and blow the candles out, little Thankful contrived to slip unnoticed from the room. Quick as a wink, she ran in and over to our sofa. I thought she was coming to fetch me in with her to share in the festivities, but no indeed. Far different thoughts were prompting her. Before I could take in what had happened, she had seized me and thrust me with all her strength into the narrow corner where the back, arm, and seat of the sofa all fitted together. I was really too big to go in, but she was determined, and her fingers forced and pushed me out of sight. The sofa was done in horsehair, which scratched me cruelly as I went in. Had I been made of anything but stout ash wood, I feel sure I should have snapped in too, but somehow or other I survived. Once I was past the edge of the seat, there was slightly more room, a sort of corner behind the framework and upholstery, of the size a mouse might use to set up housekeeping in before his family grew too numerous. In a daze of despair, I lay there, and heard little Thankful running back to the other room. It was not possible, I thought, that she could have deserted me, and after I had taken so much of the criticism upon my own person when things were going their worst. It is a bitter thing, indeed, to realize that those one holds dear are ashamed of one. I think I have never suffered more in my life than when I realized what had happened. Even later on, when the children came to collect their dolls from the sofa to go home, and I heard them bewailing the fact that my beautiful wax neighbor's face had started to run from being too near the fire, even then I could scarcely take the satisfaction in this that I should formerly have taken on. No doll but must have felt miserable under the circumstance.